Okay, I think we are ready to get started. Hi, welcome everyone to the virtual forum on data economics. This is the first in a number of sessions we'll have planned on this topic, so we welcome all of our panelists today as well as the audience. Thanks for joining. I'm Jennifer Hinkle. For those participating today who don't know me, I'm a health economist. I'm also a cancer data researcher, and I've spent more than 15 years in the health policy and biotech sectors in the US, Latin America, and Europe. I'm currently working in the biotech industry. I'm also completing a doctorate at the University of Oxford, and I've been part of this research collaboration on data economics for about 3 years at this point. I'm very excited to help host the session today. I'm excited that this expert alliance has the opportunity to share some of our discoveries and ongoing projects with a much larger audience for the first time. Also, for some housekeeping items, we'll be watching the Q&A here in the Zoom. So any questions you have, please go ahead, type those in. They'll be relayed to our presenters and our panelists. Also, this session is being recorded, so if you have to miss something for any reason, you'll have the opportunity to see that again another time. On the agenda today, can we get that agenda up there? Thanks. On the agenda today, we have 3 main segments. We only have 75 minutes. There's only so much ground we can cover in that time, so we hope what we present today is enough to whet your appetite for more. We do promise there's a lot more coming in terms of deeper dives and richer content. This is really just the start. So in the first segment, I'll introduce Arka Ray. He's the founder of the Data Economics Company. He will introduce us to the emerging scientific field of data economics and help us understand what that is all about. Second, we'll hear from Surtaj Brar. He's been working to implement technology solutions in data economics across a number of industries. He will welcome a group of panelists to discuss data economics projects and implementations in healthcare, finance, climate, recycling, agriculture, and more. Third, we will wrap up hearing from Arka and colleagues about what's to come in the data economics field and how the Data Economics Company and the broader Research Alliance plans to advance the science through 2021 and how you can get involved. So I hope the excitement and the optimism that this group of researchers, experts, technologists has developed around data economics sparks your curiosity, and I hope that you decide to join us in imagining what lies ahead. So to kick off the top of our program here, I will introduce Arka Ray. So he is a Berkeley trained computer scientist. He's a mathematician, also an alum of Microsoft. Since Microsoft, he started a number of companies. He's really, in my opinion, one of the founding science minds of the data economics field. And it's really nice to have you here today. So thanks, Arka. I don't know if I can hear you. You might still be on mute.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.
So Arka, you first introduced me to the science of data economics a few years ago. At the time, I was very interested in, and I continue to conduct research in health economics, and this idea of attaching value to complex outcomes. I found this really compelling. So the concept at the time, you've been really working for a while on this idea of a data economics operating system, and the concept that data can bridge, basically be a bridge or even a language, I guess, between data and how we are expressing value, and then how we can even exchange that value. So really how data can be an economic tool. So that's really captured my imagination now for a while. And I have to say, it was a huge aha moment for me when we started talking in the healthcare background. And I know there's some of our audience comes from that background as well. We're very used to talking about clinical utility, clinical outcomes, and expressing value that way. But we have not traditionally been that great at pulling those outcomes through to talk about the financial value or societal value of science and innovation, and how all of that can connect into clinical value and really into this broader idea of outcomes. So that was very exciting for me.
Yeah, Jen, at the time when we first started talking, I had quite limited exposure to the healthcare world in general, but realized very quickly that from a game theory and economics math perspective, that, and obviously through discussions that you and I and then our alliance had, that the types of problems that were challenging the healthcare industry really are not that different from similar problems in other industries, where data to tell the whole story is siloed. And as a result, it's difficult for parties to come together and agree on what value is. This really gets to one of the core promises of data economic thinking, if you will, that when data can be packaged up and becomes interoperable through data economic operating systems, such as the one that we are developing with the Lydion DEOS, it allows much more contiguous views of valuable and meaningful outcomes in these highly complex industries.
Thanks. And, I recall some of our early conversations where I was talking, healthcare economic problems, and you were talking about things in gaming and esports because of your technical background and business background. And there was kind of this shared moment where we realized we were both talking about some bigger picture economic concepts, some concepts in game theory, some concepts around shared incentives, and those kinds of things, and really value and translating, value into something that can be exchanged.
Yeah, Jen. I mean, I'm glad that we had that meeting at that coffee shop in Emeryville and have had a chance to correspond ever since on the ideas. None of this would be here without that. Since then, as you know, we've developed a research alliance that includes economists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and experts in fields that are as diverse, and you'll meet some of them: healthcare, biotech, finance, manufacturing, climate science, agriculture, telecom, energy, and gaming, which is near and dear to my heart, which has led to the development of the science that we call data economics with a capital D and capital E, and a technology suite called Lydion, including, as you mentioned, the Lydion Data Economic Operating System. So
data economics is really an emerging discipline and field of study. And based on our previous discussions, I know there are a lot of ways to define it, to explain it. But how would you go about explaining data economics at a high level to our audience? And we'll assume, even though we know we have some folks we've been chatting with for quite a while on here, let's assume that there might be people listening to this who really are new to this field, and they might not be experts in economics or in data technology.
Sure, I'll approach in a couple of different ways. So the most general definition would be that data economics is a science that deals with the implications of treating digital data as units of utility and value that can enable economic activity. Now, utility, as we know, is just an economic word for use, and something with use is something of value. So to put it another way, data economics is concerned with treating digital data as raw material that can build or manufacture products. And these products can then enable us to pay for things using digital data, and then measure the value of other things using these digital data-based products. So as a result, data economics lets us sell, license, and buy the ownership of utility of data, the ownership of uses of data, without losing control or ownership of the underlying data sets.
Yeah, I mean, the scope of this is potentially pretty broad, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it is very broad. And so let's maybe try and scope it down and look at three canonical scenarios that data economics is interested in. First is others pay you money in exchange for specific units or pieces of your data. Second is you can pay others with specific units of your data in exchange for goods, services, labor. And then the third, and probably the most interesting one, is others pay you with their units of data in exchange for your units of data. So let's break down these scenarios, especially the first one, because that is probably the one that sounds like something familiar, that others can pay you money in exchange for specific pieces of your digital data. We are all familiar with business models that have to do with buying, selling, licensing digital data sets. So if we just took a broad look at what are the current models for utilizing digital data, they are as follows. There are two, really. Serving as data sources for digital applications that are delivering features and value to users, and hence generating revenue for the creator of the digital application. That's basically been the canonical use of digital data since we've been dealing with it. And the second, and a more recent one, with the growth of big data platforms, machine learning platforms, is that digital data can now serve as a commodity that, when analyzed, can produce insights leading to potentially more revenue. Data economics, on the other hand, looks at digital data from a slightly different perspective, or a very different perspective. It looks at digital data as raw material for manufacturing, or minting, as we call it, products that have both utility and hence value. We call these products built of this raw material of digital data assets, again, with a capital D and capital A.
All right, so you and I have talked before about this concept of packaging up data, selling or licensing the utility, the uses of that data rather than the underlying data itself. And to me, this has always sounded kind of like a radical concept. I mean, radical in a good way, because there's this idea that the people generating data or the companies generating the data have more ownership or control over that. They're not giving up their underlying assets. And so, I'm an analogies person, as you guys often remind me. I like to have an analogy for everything. So my analogy here has been something around like, okay, I own a whole lot of land, maybe a whole lot of ranch land. I could sell that land to somebody else, but I could also maybe lease that land and allow someone's herd of cattle to graze upon it, so that I'm, getting some use out of the land, but I don't have to, give up the land itself. Can you maybe run with that analogy there a little bit? But I mean, is this kind of what we're talking about? You can hold on to things, but also get use out of it in a way that maybe we haven't talked about before with data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your land analogy actually works really well. So, the difference between traditional utility of data and data economic utility of digital data can actually be demonstrated quite well with that analogy. So let's imagine that, the data sets that you or your company own or are generating are basically pieces of land. And let's say that the data streams that you are generating or have access to are lakes and rivers, for this analogy. So if someone were to say, okay, how can you utilize your land and your water bodies? How can you get use out of them and get value out of them? And you have a few options, right? The obvious option would be that you sell the land or rent it out as a whole or in pieces. The other and probably more interesting use is that you can use the land, you can use the water bodies and the resources they contain to build products that in turn have their own uses or utilities. So you can mine or extract resources, minerals, oil, etc. from the land. You can harvest fish, drinking water out of your water bodies, and then you can sell or rent these out. These are products sort of that you just extracted from your land. Now, it gets even more interesting when you think about using these extracted resources to create new products through a manufacturing process. So let's say you can forge metallic products from extracted ore. You can purify and package the water to sell it as bottled water. You can till the land, sow seed, and grow crops. Even more interesting is in many cases, you can even combine these products that are coming from your land and your water. So let's say if you have the tools, could combine the ore, the metal, and the oil to, let's say, build an engine. You can, let's say, do something like build canals to use the water to irrigate your crops. Or if we just put everything together, you could route water to a hydroelectric pump that is then being run by this engine that you developed. So basically, within a data economic frame of reference, or a data economy for short, we can treat our data sets and data streams as reusable raw materials that can be used in pretty much these three ways. So you can extract data from data sets and data streams to manufacture products called data assets that are, again, utilizing the underlying data. These data assets can then be sold, licensed, and bought, or otherwise utilized. In addition, you can then create new data assets using existing data assets as inputs or raw material. And then, of course, you can combine different classes or different types of data asset products to create new data asset products.
Yeah, so I mean, this is really interesting. So this means that you can, create these data assets and then create different kinds of products. You're saying all based out of the same data. So, I mean, for a business that's generating a lot of data, what does that mean? They could generate, revenue in a lot of different ways from the same data stream?
That's exactly right. That's the fun part about using data as raw materials and as intermediate resources to build products. That, unlike physical resources, digital data can be copied and transformed without losing the original raw material. Hence, the same data set can be used to produce multiple types of revenue generating data assets, each increasing the value of the underlying data set.
So can you give us some examples, like real world industry examples of how this would work?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you two examples. These are not necessarily things that we are directly working on right now. We'll see those examples later, but these are more intuitive. So one that we've been throwing around for a while now that actually works really well is let's take the example of a consumer music streaming application. So this application, let's say, allows listeners to stream music and for creators to upload and advertise their music. The company that's running this application is therefore collecting data both on the listening habits of music lovers as well as on the creation habits of music creators. This company can potentially create different types of data assets using the same underlying data sets, and sometimes by even combining different data sets. So for example, a data asset type could package up key analytics and insights about the habits and preferences of that are completely anonymized or aggregated or something like that of music creators, and then be targeted as products to companies that are producing things for music creators. Another type of data asset could be packaging up insights on the behavior, on the anonymized behavior of music listeners, and be targeted towards other companies that are catering to music fans. Or let's go even further. Let's say that a company like, let's say SoundCloud decided to allow a competitor like Spotify to have access to the insights derived from the habit of SoundCloud's listeners. SoundCloud may not only want to control the specific insights that Spotify has access to, but also ensure that they get credit each time Spotify utilizes or profits from their data. This again is a hypothetical, by the way. We are not working with SoundCloud or Spotify. But that gets us to another example, which might be even more interesting. So let's pause for a second and think, why aren't the users of the streaming application, the music streaming application, whose data is actually powering all of this, why aren't they getting any credit, any share of the revenue that is being generated through the anonymous music consumption data, anonymous music creation data? And this is true for all data that we generate through our digital devices. Our data gets monetized, but none of the credit flows back to us. For example, one of the most valuable types of data that our phones and tablets continuously generate and transmit is location data. GPS and related data where noting where the device is at any time physically. Cellular networks have access to, and to a great extent own, the data that they are helping transmit through their networks. Yet it is you, the user, who is doing the work to create those data assets. If a system existed that allowed you to control exactly who gets to use your anonymized location data, if you so choose, with your permission, and to also receive credit for this data being licensed or sold, then the relationship between you and your cell phone company would look very different than it does today. Not only would such a system potentially let you earn money from a share of the revenue generated, let's say, from your anonymized location data, in such a world, the cell phone companies would be competing with each other to give you value in exchange for giving them access to and permission to utilize your anonymized location data. Value which could include anything from cell phone services to handset upgrades to other incentives potentially unlocked by your data. You might be effectively paying for your cell phone service, your handsets, and much more with your data when they are turned into these data asset products.
Yeah. I mean, my takeaway from our discussions about this has been that data asset products are a more sophisticated, packaged up form of data, that they include some level of meaning about what that data is. I mean, basically these data assets, as you call them, are manufactured using underlying data sets as the raw materials. And then what's fascinating here, I think from a business standpoint, is that it sounds like these data assets can enable all kinds of lines of revenue or monetization approaches that really have not been available available to companies before. And this also is really interesting for companies that can't or won't or not able to sell their data for a variety of reasons. It sounds like maybe because of privacy, data protection rules, sensitivity of data, and so forth. They might still be able to derive some revenues from that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is, what you just mentioned is just one of several classes of really difficult problems involving digital data that have been around forever that becomes significantly simpler to tackle when modeled within what we call a data economic frame of reference. So as you said, the owner of or manufacturer of the data may not want to lose ownership of the underlying data sets. They might want to control the data sets, but allow others to utilize the data for very specific defined purposes. There might be a desire in this case for the manufacturer to track exactly who uses the data and for what. There might be incentive systems that need to get designed and enforced to ensure that credit for each such utilization of a data asset flows back to its manufacturer. One very interesting use case that we've seen over and over again is that there are shared answers that might need to be formed, answers to common questions that different entities and different parties have that need to be formed from partial results that can only be derived from different data sources that are completely diverse, possibly belonging to different entities in completely different formats and with different constraints. In fact, if you take that, make it even harder, there might be sensitive data in these data sets that cannot themselves be shared, but only computed results from those could be shared that help generate these shared answers. That becomes even harder when someone wants to, without looking at the input data that was used, look at the output and verify that the correct set of input data was used. So we could go on and on into like the classes of very interesting problems that become much more accessible using data economics.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think I get that. And here's what I'm understanding so far. So by assetizing, so to speak, the digital data, we're creating different types of data asset products. Each product can potentially be traded and utilized in its own market, so to speak. So, one, we can have the same underlying data used as raw material to enable multiple kinds of revenue generating data asset products. Two, these data asset products potentially enable lines of revenue that would not otherwise be available or feasible in traditional models. And then three, each of these different classes or types of data assets could be generated from company or individual data sets and transacted essentially. And I'm thinking about this as well in terms of company valuations. I mean, I know that we're going to have some partners come on and talk about this a little bit later, so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it's very interesting to me that we're starting to think of data here as a little bit of a more tangible good or tangible asset. Right now, data is really viewed as an intangible asset. And so if this were viewed a little differently, I think it has really interesting potential implications for the way that we think about company valuation, but also the way that we think about the value of all of the data that we generate as individuals, and what that is worth, who controls it, who benefits from it, who owns it, and so on. So, as you guys can probably tell, I get pretty excited talking about these concepts. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but to pull it back a bit and get to the practical stuff, like how does this actually work? How do you take a raw data set or data stream, and manufacture a data asset out of it?
Well, that's a really great question and a very deep one. The how of manufacturing data assets, it's pretty much at the heart of data economics. And I think that we could spend pretty much the whole day exploring the answers. But we'll try to keep it brief here and focus on just a few key concepts. The most fundamental concept that we need to clarify is that of a data economic frame of reference. I've used this term a couple of times, and that's the same thing as a data economy, so that's interchangeable. What is a data economic frame of reference? Well, much like we need a frame of reference with an origin point for, let's say, any coordinate system to make sense, we need a data economic frame of reference for data assets and their related properties, features, and other concepts to exist. If I just gave you two numbers, you wouldn't be able to tell if it's a latitude and longitude or if it refers to, like, let's say, a specific mathematical graph. Similarly, for data assets to exist, there needs to be a data economic frame of reference. So as far as these products, these data assets built using digital data as raw material are concerned, their existence, their utility, their value are limited to the participants, which in this case are people, groups, organizations, even computers or physical machines, any entity capable of doing work or expending energy within a specific data economic frame. So outside of these participants, the data asset has no meaning, no utility, no value. So we'll take it for granted that whenever we talk about a data asset or data asset market, etc., that they exist within a defined data economic frame of reference. Outside this data economic frame, a data asset is just an ordered set of ones and zeros. The second key concept is that in order to be used as a product, a standalone product that has utility, there are a set of features that that product needs to have. And this is not specific to digital data products, by the way. Like any product that you can use usually has these features. There's identity, which basically in this case means how the package of data representing the product or asset can be identified within the data economy and distinguished from its copies. Context, which is what the package of data within the product means to others. Utility, which is exactly how the data asset can be utilized, when, by whom, under what conditions. Value, which is basically the same as utility. It's a measure of utility, which is to express the value of a data asset as money or even as other data assets. So the manufacturer of a data asset needs to define and control at least these features, as well as have a means to express them to all the other participants in the data economic frame. Now, the concept of a data economic frame where we are able to pay with digital database products might sound alien, but we actually operate within data economies a fair bit already in our day-to-day lives. And we pay for things that are pretty much data assets. So a few examples. Simplest one would be to think of a loyalty card, let's say at a coffee shop. So the context there, the meaning of the loyalty card asset is that it tells you that a certain amount of coffees have been purchased. The use of that, the utility is that it might get you a new cup of coffee. The process might be when it's transferred to a coffee shop employee. In this case, this is a data economic frame of reference with you, the customer, and the coffee shop. Similarly, let's say for credit card miles, what it says is that you've used your credit card sufficient to perform sufficient number of transactions to earn a certain amount of miles, which can then be used to access for flights worth up to a certain amount of money. How? When transferred to the credit card company or an airline that is associated with the credit card company. Now note, the loyalty card has only meaning within the data economic frame of reference that contains you and the coffee shop. You can't go and use a loyalty card, let's say at Starbucks. Similarly, you can't necessarily use your miles at Walmart to buy whatever it is you might buy at Walmart. You have to go to a specific set of entities which are within the frame of reference to use it. And in fact, if you think about money, money is also a data asset. It means, like, let's say the US dollar means that it's 1 unit of credit from the US Treasury that can be utilized to access goods and services worth $1 when its ownership is transferred to another entity. And who's in that data economic frame of reference? Well, the US Treasury and all the entities that are using US dollar. And a very recent one is, let's say, Bitcoin, which again has very similar properties where a certain amount of energy has to be spent to create a Bitcoin. It can be used as a form of currency, but only within the data economic frame of reference of the Bitcoin network, the people who are mining the Bitcoin and Bitcoin users.
Yeah, I mean, all of this makes sense to me, but the thing, and we've talked about this a bit before. I mean, all of these data economies that exist out there, even if we are participating, generating the data through our actions, like generating a credit card mile when we buy something, I mean, that data at the end of the day is not really under our control. It's not owned by us or controlled by us. It's really controlled by either like the coffee shop in this case, or the company, or even in the Bitcoin network, it's controlled by that network. We don't have a lot of autonomy over how that's used.
That is exactly right. And that is the insight that I was driving towards. So while we are paying for things using digital data all the time, none of the data being used to create or manufacture these digital assets actually belongs to us, even if we generate it. That's where the Lydion data economic methodology and the Lydion data economic operating system, or DEOS, comes in. The primary goal of the Lydion DEOS is to allow the design and implementation of data assets and the data economic frames that they live within using any combination of data sets and data streams owned by the participants in that data economy. That is, Lydion data assets are created using data sets that we, companies and people, generate and own.
And what would you say, like, what's the key insight that drives this process and how it works?
The method that Lydion takes to turn data into data assets is actually very simple. Let's examine the context or the meaning of all of the real world data assets that we discussed so far. And we see that there's a pattern. The data asset itself is always the outcome or the result of work performed in the real world that requires a provable, non-trivial amount of energy being spent. Put another way, each data asset contains data expressing the proof of work performed or energy expended in the real world. And this data, with this proof of work, with this proof of energy expended, is bundled into the data asset as its context or for its very reason for existing.
Got it. So like I buy these 10 coffees at the coffee shop, and then I've proven that I have
exactly
coffees with my card.
Exactly. And your loyalty card data asset in that case has that data in it. Lydion, the Lydion DEOS, just takes this concept and generalizes it into a framework in which any digital data set and data stream gets packaged up into these logical blocks that A, represent the proof, the measurement of results or outcomes, and B, these outcomes are created by some kind of work performed, a set of completed tasks, as we call it, that require some expenditure of energy. Each such package, each such logical block is a data asset. And that leads us to the key insight that is at the heart of the Lydion data economic methodology. The very existence of a Lydion data asset is the result of work performed, or more specifically, tasks completed in the real world. This work generated valuable results or outcomes that can be captured and expressed through digital data that is bundled into the data asset as context. If such work had not been completed, the data asset would not exist. So let's take a simple example to extend our earlier data assets to look at a Lydion data asset that, let's say, packages up your anonymized location data, as we had seen earlier. What is the context? What is the meaning? What is the reason for existing, for that data asset existing? It exists because the manufacturer of that data asset traveled through location X, some GPS coordinates, at time T. What are the new outcomes? What are the uses? What's the utility of this? Well, it can potentially be utilized by the manufacturer to gain access to money from the cell phone network or others, or, as we said, to gain access to other interesting services like Y hours of cell phone service. And how is it utilized? What's the process? When it's transferred, when you are giving permission to the telecom company, to the cell phone network, to use your location data for some reason, that whether they want to resell it, whether they license it or use it themselves. So a Lydion data asset created by the Lydion data economic operating system is a package comprising two types of data. The first is context, which is the data representing the meaning for its existence, which essentially is a set of these completed tasks that had to be completed and that had to generate results in order to generate this asset. This is further divided into what we call generation context and utility context. Won't go into the details, but generation context is basically the completed tasks that were required to generate the asset in the first place. The utility context are the tasks that were performed using or utilizing the asset after it was generated. The second type of data are the rules that are embedded in the data asset. And these are expressed as modular digital programs. We call these each machine, and they together form a data asset factory. And these rules control how that data asset is generated, utilized, and evaluated. The context and the rules within the data asset allow it to answer some very, very important questions for any participant within that data economic frame of reference. Who are you and how can you be identified? Why were you made? What have you been utilized for in the past? What can you be used for in the future? And how can you prove these answers? The answers to these questions give the participant in the data economy all the information that they need to make decisions around the value and the utility of a specific type or a specific instance of that type of data asset.
Oh, sorry, I was muted this time. So the Lydion data economic operating system that you are working on developing with all of these research partners, I mean, this effectively creates data markets as well, right, for these data assets to be traded or exchanged within. Can you talk a bit about that next step up from the data asset where we're talking about a data market?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we talk about what it is that actually gets built out of the Lydion data economic operating system? So as you said, first and foremost, we have to consider this idea of a data asset market. The people and the organizations who are within a data economic frame of reference and generate or utilize a specific class of data asset are essentially are participants in a market. And that market exists only within that data economic frame of reference. And we call this a data asset market or a DAM. Each data asset market, therefore, has three very important components: participants, the people who are generating and utilizing its assets; what we call a data asset factory, which is a set of digital programs called machines that enforce the identity, context, utility, and evaluation rules for that data asset type; and a data asset vault, which is a storage system, usually a database, that contains all of the instances of all of the data assets that are created and managed by that data asset market. So a Lydian data economic frame of reference, specifically of all of the data economic frames of reference we've seen, a Lydian data economic frame of reference or a Lydian data economy is just a set of data asset markets, each managing a single type or class of data asset that have the same set of participants. And this data economic frame of reference, these markets get implemented as what we call a data economic application or a DE app. Now, each participant in a data economy has to have a way to participate in the data economy. And the idea here is that of a data economic node, which is really no different from a node in any digital network. A data economic node is just a computer that's running a data economic application, and that represents a specific participant's membership in that data economy's markets. So the data economic nodes running the same data economic application, implementing the same set of data economic markets, can communicate with each other, forming what we call a data economic network or a DNet. That's an important concept. A DNet can be thought of as the real world representation of a Lydian data economic frame. So all of the markets and the assets that they create within the Lydian data economic frame are implemented in the real world by this data economic network powered by one or more data economic applications. These applications together make up the final concept of a data economic solution, which are essentially products, software products, built using the Lydian data economic operating system that aim to address specific opportunities and problems in an industry through the implementation of data economic networks or DENETs in the real world. I believe that we'll see several examples of such data economic solutions that we've been developing using the Lydian DEOS with collaboration with our academic and industry partners, and learn a little bit about the impact that these solutions are having and can have, hopefully will have very soon in their respective fields. So Jen, honestly, we've just scratched the surface of data economics and the Lydian DEOS in this chat. I've gone through so many key concepts in a span of a few minutes. There is so much more to explore and discover. And as you said, we'll have several opportunities coming up for our audience who want to go deeper into the science and technology coming up very soon. But in the meanwhile, whether someone here is interested in the economics, the math, the computer science, the real world impact, the business models of data economics, we would love to chat with you. So please reach out.
Yep. Hey, do we have time for one or two? I see there are one or two questions in the Q&A. Do we want to hold those to the very end, or
let's hold it till the end, since
okay.
we have our partners.
There are a few more coming in. So yeah, I mean, people can feel free to put those questions in because I want to make sure we have a lot of partners on the line. So our next segment here.
We have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end, by the way. So
yeah, that's right. So our next segment here today, we've invited a bunch of folks who have been working with Arka and his team on various implementations and partnerships. And so I'm going to invite Sertaj Brar to hop on as well. Okay, I see that he's on the video. And hear Arka from you and from Sertaj about your partnership models, who these partners are. Sertaj, maybe you can start by introducing yourself and then get into the content.
Hey, sure. Thanks a lot, Jen. Hey, everyone. My name is Sertaj. I've been part of the team for a couple of years now. My background is really in science and technology and consulting, really a lot of consulting. More than anything for the past 15 years, I've been focusing on helping companies implement technologies and just solve real world business problems through that process. As a part of the data economics company, really my focus has been, something similar, working with our partners, bringing these things to life, everything that Orko was just talking about.
Yeah, so Sertaj, as you've been, out there in the field talking to various companies about data economics and talking about this technology, how do you identify where there are partnership opportunities, and then how do you, make those come to life?
Well, really, we kind of look at it two ways. We started off in a process really focused on direct implementations, where we were bringing all the tools, working. We started primarily in the health sciences, pharma space. Bringing these data economic networks to life. Since then, we've started to explore more of a middleware model, we'll call it, where really, it allows us to stay focused on the core technology, but through our partners, allowing them to really, whether it's using this to enhance existing products, build on top of things that they're already doing, or bring new products, new tools, new solutions to their industry, whatever that is. So those are really like the two ways that we've kind of been going about it.
Thanks. So I think we're about to dive into some industry specific examples here. And, I think the first one we're going to talk about is actually the project that you and I have been working on a lot together. So that is in the healthcare space, and it's around what we call outcomes-based agreements. So for those who are not coming from the pharma or biotech space, what outcomes-based agreements seek to do is attach the financial reward for a healthcare product to the health outcome that it contributes to, rather than just to administration of the drug or the product. So, for those who know healthcare, this would be a pretty radical departure from how finance and reimbursement work in the healthcare system now. But what makes it so interesting, oh yeah, and for people looking at the slide, where this is a list of all of the different industry initiatives, but this is really in that second column, solution one. What makes the idea of an outcomes-based contract or attaching healthcare finance to an outcome so interesting is that it can really potentially align incentives across players in the healthcare system that traditionally haven't been aligned with each other. So, this is, I'm not going to say that this is easy to do. This is really, really, really hard to do, because you've got to align a bunch of players that traditionally are not that aligned. You have to define what health outcomes are important. You have to have common definitions for those. There are some non-technology issues, I guess, around defining the business models and the financial models, the regulatory and policy issues. There are some things around financial risk, which we'll get into a bit when we talk about finance, because some of those I think can be mitigated by technology. But really the only way to do outcomes-based agreements with efficiency in the market would be for all of the players to participate in some way with a common technology backbone. So one of the things that's excited me the most about data economic solutions and about the operating system specifically that you're building is that this kind of system could serve as that kind of technology backbone. So, Surtaj, if you can take control of the screen, I know we've been working on, a little software show that I think we can put up for people, and you can just walk through, what an example of basically raw data becoming data assets in the healthcare space.
And this is a part of our solution, by the way. This is the physical manifestation of it, which is really fun.
So, Surtaj, I don't know, I think you're on
mute,
Surtaj, but if you can walk us through what's happening here. It's
sorry,
like the
forgot to unmute myself.
On the left are the raw claims data. So this is like insurance company, the kind of insurance company data that you could base this on.
Yeah, so that's what you see here on the left-hand side. And basically just to, harken back to what Orca was talking about earlier, this is that completed task sort of data that you see coming through. It's being processed through like, hey, are the machines that have been built. And then the output is being combined right now to generate two types of data assets. The very first one is basically like, hey, this drug was administered at this time for this patient, whatever sort of information is associated with that. Then the second level asset here kind of goes into, hey, it looks at that whole data set to make a determination about like for how many months was this patient being treated, and what does that sort of outcome tell us in terms of, let's say, like how the patient is doing, how long they're living, all of that stuff. And then, what we can do is we can take that and attach some sort of like financial outcome, some kind of payment, other things that go to like these outcomes-based agreements associated with that. I don't want to spend too much time on this demo itself. I'm going to use the opportunity to plug Lydion Insider, which is, it's coming soon, and you guys will get an opportunity to log in over there and play around with this and some others as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is exciting for me here is that, we're pretty sure that we can, at least from a background technical standpoint, like solve a lot of the technology barriers to these kind of contracts, and that the technology can, help not only, I guess, manage or adjudicate these, but that there's another layer that can be built on top of this that helps manage the financial, the financial risk. And so to talk a little bit more about that, who carries the financial risk in these contracts and how, data assets could, maybe facilitate that in the financial and investment world, I'm going to invite Viren and Mahurkar to join our panel. So Viren, if you could introduce yourself and talk a bit about your background and what we're working on.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, Arka and Septaj, for those comments earlier. So I'm Viren Mahurkar. My background is essentially two domains. I spent a lot of time in the finance world as a banker, both on the market side and on investment banking. And I've also spent many years in the pharmaceutical industry, working with companies like Pfizer, Novartis, and medical devices, Alcon. Where I've played the role of doing M&A transactions, deal making and investments. And a lot of my work has actually involved both in my finance and in my biopharmaceutical world work around sort of looking at what would be the pricing of products, how do you make access available for medical products to a larger set of people. So that's my background.
Hey Viren, thanks so much. What I really want to ask you about or get you to share a little bit more about is one of these things that Jen mentioned earlier around like the risk of these OBAs and some of the work that we've been doing around creating financial instruments for laying off that risk and just for outcomes-based contracts. Health outcomes data in general, and like how does that play for say like biopharma investors or others?
Sure. So first of all, just speaking about investors in general, they're always on the lookout for what in the investment world is called alpha, which means new ways of making money which are unrelated to existing market risks. So that's what any investment journal you pick up or any financial newspaper you pick up, you'll probably find the word alpha scattered all over. So everyone's in this search for this elusive alpha. And one of the things that or one of the ways people want to find alpha is to exploit risks that are unrelated to, as far as possible, to macroeconomic activity, other situations, etc. In the biopharma world, I believe we're generating, we're doing things. So for example, a lot of investors might have interest in all the scientific innovation that's happened in the last few years. The last 10 years or 12 years or so have been a phase of dramatic scientific revolution in the medical world. And investors might want access to that. And they might want access to it also for the reason that, while on the one hand it is producing, it's creating all these new biopharmaceutical companies who are making huge bucks and so on. But there's an element of medical risk that so far has remained, to my mind, relatively untouched. Which is that when you treat somebody with a particular medicine, the outcome of that is what, for example, when you have health insurance, the health insurer is taking on the risk that that medicine will work or not. And that particular medical risk is something that, other than the health insurance companies, there are not a lot of investors who are able to access those. And even for the health insurance companies, it's more of an administrative pain rather than, and they want to minimize those kind of risks. So there seems to be a whole world of financial risk, which seems to be unrelated. So how well your cancer responds to Merck's new medication, how well your blood pressure gets controlled by the new blood pressure medicine or whatever it is something that seems to be at least to common understanding, unrelated to the wider economy or the market or something. Now, can investors get exposure? Can they jump on to making money off those kind of risks? Can I bet that a new medication that controls heart disease is doing a better job than the previous one? Is that purely financial or economic? Probably not. Is that related to what's happening in the economy? Probably not. Can I make money off betting on that? Maybe I could. And that's probably where where something like this comes in, where the use of data sets, as was being described earlier, which probably are just lying around, nobody's paying attention to them, The owners of those are don't even know that there is a financial opportunity or there's a financial investment opportunity out here. Can we convert those into real financial opportunities? I think that's where it would be.
Yeah. Hey, getting a little bit of feedback on somebody's line. Thanks, Viren, for that. The really the detail there, and I just want to recognize the amount of the thought and consideration that's really gone into some of the things that we're starting to put together in terms of the risk analysis and what that looks like and what the opportunities there are around outcomes-based agreements and in other areas as well for laying off that risk of different contracts. I'm going to use the opportunity right now, while we're talking about sort of the financial sector, to introduce our finance initiative. And I'm actually going to start with inviting our next two sort of advisors, partners, Alan and Pat. If you guys could maybe just introduce yourselves.
Hi, Pat McCarty here. Longtime lawyer, former general counsel at the CFTC, worked for the chairman at the SEC, been very involved in swaps, futures, securities, hedge funds, the financial services sector for the last 30 years. If there's one thing that's very clear, the financial services sector, if there's a chance to make some money on something, they will try to do it. On to you, Alan. I'm not sure if we've got Alan.
He's on. Alan, you're muted.
Hey. There we go. Sorry about the. Yeah, thank you for including me today. I really appreciate being part of this effort, and I'm excited about the opportunities. A lot like Pat, we're both in Washington D.C., and we kind of balance each other out on the political spectrum, which is always good. I too have been involved in public affairs and public policy work in the financial regulated space for 30 years, and also the corresponding congressional committees that provide the oversight for these regulators.
Hey, great, thanks. So, hey, just to tee up a little bit of the discussion with you guys. We've talked a lot about companies, what they can do with their data, what they are doing in terms of what the opportunities are for data assets, that sort of thing. So what is it that that you guys really see in this space?
Lydion is doing some really exciting things with data. And one of the most provocative questions that I've heard in the recent past is, can companies monetize the data which they own and hold, which they really can't do today? Alan and I have talked about this, and we believe, why not? I mean, I think that there are actually some instances of people selling data that they have, but it's not nearly as widespread as it probably ought to be. Intellectual property rights, like trademarks, patents, copyrights, clearly have value. Major companies have significant inventory of market and customer data, which other companies and investors would be very interested in. So what financial instruments could unlock the value of a company's data? We can envision the creation of data futures and swaps contracts in addition to other financial instruments. Futures and swaps contracts can help market participants with price discovery, what are those assets worth, as well as hedging some of the expense and cost of basically producing those assets.
Yeah, I might. Just one thing I would like to really point out, and it's somewhat of a restatement of what Pat just said in one way. But Arka, you mentioned earlier, these data assets are being created by, you may own them, you may put them together and package them. But the real issue there is, this is not about transfer of ownership. The derivatives markets are not built that way. What they're about is retaining ownership, but allowing the risk of the value of that asset to be traded. Because some people want more risk, some people want less risk. That's what these markets are about. And I think it's just the logical next step, if you will. Once you create the data assets, then, as Pat mentioned, there ought to be a way to more universally trade the assets.
Hey, thanks. Ed, what you guys have done is really kind of just nicely set up one of our solutions in the one of our products in the finance initiative. And I'm going to jump over. I'm going to just maybe we go to the next slide real quick before I introduce Nancy and Alice. But like basically, we have two solutions here in this space. The first one is just this sort of this data economic derivatives platform right now focused on like outcomes-based agreements, but also started to look at what other things, and you'll hear some of those examples coming up pretty soon. Overall for our finance initiative, it's finance is really broad, and we've really just focused it in on these two solutions. And the other one really is this sort of what we call ATM, but it's all about data valuation. We call the data economic valuation platform. And to talk, it's focused very much on data how much data is worth, like in a monetary sense, what companies are able to do with it. And to talk more about that, I'm actually going to bring on, I'm going to ask Alice and Nancy to join us and maybe do some quick intros. Alice, are you there?
I am. Nancy's name was first, so I was just going to let her go. But sure, I'll go first. Ark, I wanted to say great job too on explaining very complex concepts in I think an incredibly understandable format. You did great. And every time I have a conversation with Lydion, I feel like I get smarter. I accidentally created a big data company. I didn't set out to. I wanted to solve a problem of the spread of misinformation in specialty healthcare. I myself am a cancer survivor and the mom of an IVF success story. And because of science and technology, my first investors for a company we call Med Answers were doctors. They agreed not only to invest in the company, but to answer our users' anonymous personal questions. And they asked us to create a mini health profile so that they could do a better job in answering their question with relevance. That created an incredible data set. And with a mere 60,000 users, because we also integrated genetics into our data, we are now sitting on 250 million data points. And I had no frame of reference as I was setting up to do a Series A round of funding to understand how to communicate the value of that asset to the market, to communicate who the potential buyers would be, and also just to have that framework of how do we package it and resell, the same data set, but in unique and compelling ways to venture capitalists who are evaluating market opportunity, to healthcare centers, to doctors themselves, trying to expand their service offering in specialty areas of healthcare, to marketers, who are trying to spend their money more wisely in various markets. So this has been an incredible project with Lydion going through the valuation process, and I'm excited for the next steps with Lydion to help us package them up and actually sell them. In particular, with allowing our users to participate in the economic upside. We fundamentally and ethically believe that we did not get into this business to quote unquote take their data and make money off of them. In particular, we operate in areas of healthcare in which out-of-pocket expenses can be exorbitant. And it excites us greatly for the opportunity to let them participate in the economic upside of the data set.
Hey, Alice, thanks so much. Hey, Nancy, I have a couple questions for you to follow up on that, but maybe you could introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm a CFO by trade, and with most of my experience in technology companies and like Sertaj implementing technology solutions. I'm also an active CPA and member of the CFO Leadership Council. This is a non-for-profit organization with chapters across the United States. So I worked on the technical accounting aspect of the finance vertical.
Hey, so Nancy, just speaking of that, what Alice kind of highlighted there were a couple of things. One is that, hey, her company just happened to be collecting all this data, and kind of she discovered that it's worth a lot. There's a lot more things that they could be doing with their data that is maybe not a part of what they initially set out to do. And there's also this whole concept of like incentivizing users, driving all these other revenue streams for their data. So, thinking about it from an accounting perspective and the work that we've been doing, I'm going to let you just take it from there and talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So based on what everyone's heard so far, it would make sense that companies should be able to capitalize their data as a new asset class, and it should sit on their balance sheet just like the other assets. So many companies' market cap is based on the perception of value of the data that they have or the data they're able to generate, and not just big companies like Facebook and Google, as you can see here. It's therefore incongruent that the actual recorded value of the assets on their balance sheet, which is missing this new asset class because they can't capitalize data assets under current US GAAP. Many smaller companies like MedAnswers are, as you see, sitting on a wealth of information that is potentially very valuable. As companies are able to develop markets for their data, generate revenue from them, it only makes sense that they should be able to capitalize this new asset class as it's minted. Appreciated that reference to manufacturing. Doing so basically opens up opportunities for companies to do things like obtain secured debt financing using the data asset as collateral.
And so, Nancy, what does that road look like? You know, getting this is I imagine getting a GAAP rule change is not a small thing.
No, it certainly isn't. It's definitely not a short road, but it is a path that's well established and it's worth pursuing. US GAAP does allow asset appreciation. We just need to evolve it a little bit further. Currently, US GAAP does evolve based on business needs and business cases. It does need to adapt to what's happening in the market today. Right now, I'm working closely with the Lydion team to develop the right tools and products to track value and revenue back to uniquely identified data assets. So we're also working with partners like MedAnswers that have valuable data to not only help monetize, but track it back and move the needle on the accounting standards. We've worked with some technical accounting experts in this area. The goal here is essentially to develop an accounting treatment for data as a new asset class and to have that recognized by the FASB. And that stands for Financial Accounting Standards Board. So essentially they're the ones that we need to partner with first. So what I find particularly interesting and fun as a CFO is imagine a world where your balance sheet just increased by the value of your data assets and how that affects your current ratio, which is essentially a key to unlocking access to working capital.
Hey, thanks so much, Nancy. You know, I'm going to use that you know what you're talking about there. You know, increasing access to working capital. You know, we're also doing some work in other industries where there's a huge need for that, and there could be a huge impact from the value of like data assets, the opportunities to do that. And to talk a little bit more about that, I want to introduce Abhinav and Viren, who've been kind of leading this initiative.
Hey, thanks, Ataj. My name is Abhinav Goyal, and I've also been a technology consultant in the past. And more recently, I've spent a considerable amount of time running a manufacturing business. Over the last year, we've identified this industrials and manufacturing initiative for the data economics company. And the goal really is to help companies in this industrial and capital goods sector to kind of leverage their data and develop data economic solutions. Some of the challenges that companies in this sector have are complex and non-transparent supply chains and operations. They also face heavy regulation and commodity price fluctuations. And they're constantly facing pressure to reduce cost, but also lengthen their cash flow cycles. So we really did come up with three key solutions to tackle these challenges. One is on material traceability to open up some of those transparency issues. Industrial finance, where the idea, is for companies to be able to use all the data and the data assets that they have on their balance sheet to leverage that for financial instruments. And then finally, on the compliance side, how do we stay compliant on the waste and the recycling of the entire product life cycle that manufacturing generates? I'd like to pass it off to Viren to introduce himself, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the lead industry that we're using as a showcase to develop these solutions. Vipin, you're on mute. Sounds like Vipin is not here with us. I'll quickly run it over. So we're using lead as a primary example for the metal traceability platform because it's a very hazardous material, and there are a lot of countries that don't know how to handle lead. India is one of them, and I met Vipin through his company that was developing a clean tech to recycle lead acid batteries in India. India has a large problem with an informal sector of lead recycling where lead is recycled in the backyards of people's homes, and the lead just gets seeped into the ground. So India has certain rules to handle this lead, but it's not well implemented. So we wanted to approach it from a data economics incentive platform to help the country move forward in this space. And some of the areas that Vipin also identified are, finance problems for some of these small players in this market. And if they could leverage some of their data to access finance, it helps move some of these problems ahead. So really the industrial problem platform is going to provide kind of like this integrated software infrastructure around tracking, traceability, and of course, financial leverage on data in their supply chains.
I just wanted to chime in that we actually do have Vipin. He's having some technical difficulties, but he's here with us in spirit.
Thanks, Oko. Sutaj. You're on mute, Sutaj, sorry.
Yeah. Hey, sorry, try to troubleshoot some issues while on the fly here as well. Abhinav, thanks a lot. We're going to move right along and talk a little bit about climate and environment initiative. Over here, what we're looking to do is really striving to implement solutions to really, solve some of the really challenging high impact problems in this space. There's a lot of opportunity to break down data silos, create trustable information sources that can be used, say, by like policymakers and others. There's a lot of opportunities in like ESG rating, things like that. And at the end of the day, we're trying to use the same Lydion technology to do similar things. It's getting participants to put the desired outcomes, the right outcomes, and prioritize those to make sure that, hey, we're delivering on, the promise to improve ecosystems, reduce emissions, all of those things. So, we look at it from kind of like a twofold perspective, one from like that incentives, but also just as importantly from like a traceability and making sure we're collecting all the data. To talk about that point, like on the climate reporting, I'm going to introduce Martine actually. Martine, if you can, if you're there.
Thank you, Surtaj. It's a pleasure to join all of you to discuss this exciting field. My name is Martin Wainstein. I'm the founder and lead scientist at the Open Innovation Lab at Yale University. I direct a program on finance at the Digital Currency Initiative at the MIT Media Lab, and I'm also the founder and executive director at the Open Earth Foundation. All of those hats really just point to my work, which explores how do we build open digital infrastructure to better manage our Earth system with a big focus on climate and the transformation of the energy system, and where emerging digital technologies and multi-stakeholder collaborations come together for that. It's in many ways, just like we talked about the data economy OS operating system, we still lack an Earth system operating management platform. And so a lot of that is what I like to focus on. That's my intro.
No, thanks, Martine. Hey, let's get into some of the issues that you've seen in terms of like climate tracking, the reporting. What are the challenges over there, and what are what is the work that we've been talking about doing in that space?
Yeah, and I'm going to start by borrowing nice things that Arka illustrated at the beginning. How does data help tell a story? And when it comes to climate, and when it comes to our management of our planetary carbon budget, the physical amount that we can still put into the atmosphere before we cross tipping points, it really has to bring in and bridge all the information of our emissions or our mitigations at the supply chain, at the operating level, at the energy infrastructure level, all the way into how we also manage our large policy instruments internationally. For example, the UNFCCC Paris Agreement. And so there is a crux in the process, which is if we just think between the private sector and public sector divide, as part of being able to tell a story about climate, but also how we manage our emissions going forward, there is a need for radical transparency. In fact, transparency is a fundamental part of the Paris Agreement. However, for corporations and supply chain managers and product developers to be able to transparently report their emissions, first they need to be able to have visibility around all of those operations. And emissions are invisible. So when you have a methane leak in a process, unless you have sensors on the ground, you'll not be able to tell the story that part of your product also created methane leaks. And then the second part is once one has visibility of those emissions within the boundaries of scopes of an operation, how does that get reported and broadcasted transparently alongside retaining data privacy? And this is a key crux that we've discussed all today. In the climate space, this is very important. How can I share data derivatives? So what's the aggregate of my emissions without providing all the information of my operations, where my emissions are happening? And this falls into, just to think about three important categories. What does that transparency of data means to policy? What does it mean to investors if we think about ESG, and what does it mean to end consumers that are buying products?
Hey, awesome. And then we've been working on a few different things, Martin, in terms of solutions. And do you want to tee up a little bit about just maybe a brief overview of what it looks like?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of what also Arka described is to be able to create this network of data, one has to really start mapping out the whole process from the sensors all the way to even at a company level. There's many different filters where climate relevant data has to pack to, and then where does that get disclosed to the ultimate party? And one thing that's very important, just to focus on policy, is once a public sector entity, let's say, obviously at the national level, but at a subnational level, such as the state of California, has a specific target and wants to roll out incentives for companies and private sector participants to fill out and fulfill that target, it is very important that the public sector needs to be able to rapidly audit that data and have access to it. At the same time, penalize it if a company is overly emitting and it really makes it hard for that jurisdiction to fulfill its climate data. How is it going to manage that? And this is where working with Lydion on creating the data economy structure between private and public is very important to create smart dynamic policy that really has to respond to also what's the state of the planet. And one of the exciting projects that we've been working on is, particularly because we operate a lot here in California, and California is quite at the forefront of this. How does legislation, for example, can roll out where we ask from our private sector companies to disclose information transparently, whilst ensuring that they maintain privacy of that, and that becomes very cheap to disclose and cheap to audit, because often both the private sector and the public sector have a lot of resistance of it, because having to audit all of that information and ensure that there's trust is very expensive. So by linking everything digitally and creating all the cryptographic relationships, this can be done ideally in the not so distant future, as we're working on it in almost real time.
Thanks. Just a point of housekeeping here. I know some people have sent us notes that they've got to drop off. So just to remind everybody, we are recording this entire session and we'll package that up for you. So anything that you miss, you can get to later. We're just going to keep going. We're going to go through the Q&A time. And then those of us who can, I'll stay on longer to answer more things from the Q&A if we get more questions in. So don't worry, if you have to go, you won't miss anything. We'll make sure you get the content.
Hey, Jen, thanks a lot. Still on, like to introduce our other two partners in the climate and environment space, Sean Penrith and Daniel Pike. If you guys would like to just introduce yourselves real quick.
Yeah, hi, this is Sean Penrith. I'm with Gordian Knot Strategies. I'm based in the Pacific Northwest and work closely with Daniel. We are climate finance consultants. So we work with two groups of stakeholders, if you will, those who have money and want to place it for maximum environmental impact, and those that are doing the impact and need money. And what is key to all of this is being able to successfully translate the type of impact that's actually happening on the ground, which relies on data in the ag, the forestry, the marine permaculture space. There is just a void of linked data systems. And most of these projects, because nature-based solutions offer such significant potential to meet our targets under the Paris Agreement, most of these approaches need some sort of incentivization, but you can't create an incentive program unless you can actually measure the impact on the ground. And so Daniel and I are continually confronted with this sort of challenge. I'll hand it over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Pike. I work closely with Sean at Gordian Knot Strategies, and I am also the co-founder of a nonprofit called the Drylands Natural Resources Center, which is an integrated agroforestry, reforestation, and rural development project in Kenya. It's an example of one of those projects that's having impact and needs money, right? So the project generates a whole range of environmental, social, economic benefits. We think it does that in quite an efficient way. But the challenge we've had it for over 10 years, is being able to measure that impact, right, and communicate it to other people using data. So that's a small project, and it's just one of the many that Sean and I are involved in and work with. But that challenge of being able to measure and communicate the impact you're having, and then get duly rewarded and compensated for that is one that cuts across the climate and environment space. Obviously, it links to the idea of industry tracking what's happening in its supply chain and transparency around that. It links to carbon markets, and I think it links a lot to the agriculture pillar that Lydion's working on as well, and that Hugh's going to speak to in more depth and sophistication than I can.
Yeah. Hey, why don't we introduce Hugh as well? Hugh, I think you're there as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Hugh Locke. I have had a career in the international community that has overlaps between environment, sustainable development, and humanitarian service. And 15 years ago, I decided to narrow that focus to Haiti. And 10 years ago, teamed up with a Haitian agronomist named Timothée Georges. And together we created something called the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. Our initial focus was on planting trees. And to that end, we've planted close to 8 million trees since our start in 2010.
Hugh, thanks. I'd love to hear. I'd love to have you share a bit more about the issues you're seeing, as well as like the data collection programs you've started to start to address some of the problems.
Well, our first challenge when Timothée and I set out to plant trees, we approached smallholder farmers, the only logical people in Haiti to do the tree planting. And they were not interested because they said, what's in it for us? And so we had to establish a value proposition for planting trees. And what emerged was that there were three key things smallholder farmers needed but didn't have. And so we said, all right, if we supply those three things, seed, tools, and agricultural training, and ask you to plant trees in order to receive those three things, are you on board? And so that set the basis for the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. And now we have 6,000 members that farm 3,000 farms in 7 different parts of the country, 29 tree nurseries. But the whole thing centered on the value proposition. Plant trees in order to earn agricultural services. And so we call the result tree currency. So that was our first big challenge. Then as we got larger, we realized we needed to have some way to track and measure what we were doing. And at that point, we reached out to Columbia University. And over the course of 3 years, we developed the basis for a data app specific to smallholder farmers, and did a beta model and field testing of that app. And that was the point at which we met Lydion, thank goodness, because we didn't know how to take it further. And so we're now looking at how do you take these various kinds of data and monetize them, make that useful both to smallholder farmers and eventual consumers of various agricultural products.
Hugh, thanks so much. Marco, I want to ask you to maybe come on and talk a little bit more about, some of the tools from a technology standpoint that, that are going to be available for smallholders and as well just in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Hugh and Daniel and Sean all referred to, and in fact, even Martin did, is the need for traceability and the need for distributed traceability, where we can track outcomes that might be generated from anywhere from a farm to any other location on the planet, and be able to do what we've been talking about, is manufacture these data assets that have some kind of utility, whether it's an incentive or whether it's an analytics or whatever, some combination. We need to have a method to do that. So at its heart, the agricultural platform is very similar actually to the metals traceability platform that Abhinav and Vipin have been developing, where the core components will essentially let us track and create this really interesting portfolio of data assets that are based on agricultural inputs. We've been working with Sean and Daniel on some concepts around agroforestry and creating incentives for farmers to move to more sustainable farming methods. That is a use case that the traceability platform can provide. And then built on top of that is what we're working with Hugh and Rob on, which is the smallholders platform. And that is so exciting because, as you know, Hugh and I have, you've recently gotten excited about the idea of a platform, but that is the cool thing about a platform, is that, the same smallholders platform can not only provide a basis for these economic incentives, such as implementing tree currency as assets and kind of taking that concept and spreading it out and essentially giving farmers and smallholders a portfolio, an alternative source of wealth, if you will, an alternative source of assets that they can use to gain incentives for their farms and to grow their business and to, a higher quality of life, while also having a more positive impact on the climate, on gender equality, and all the other things that Hugh, the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, and others are working on. And the same platform can be then extended to do very interesting things like self-certification models for large manufacturers who don't necessarily want to depend on expensive third-party processes and want to have first-hand visibility, want to make sure that they can provide incentives back straight to the smallholder farmers, all the way to essentially creating this entity out of, like, let's say, a smallholders data economic network that can then trade with large organizations, whether they are global manufacturers, whether they are folks like food groups, and so on and so forth. So it's just something that has become very, very interesting and very, very important to us very, very quickly. And, all thanks to Sean, Daniel, Hugh, and Rob. So really excited about that. And just to go into our final initiative, which still very much in its infancy stage. So we have a few phases that we take our solutions through. Phase one is basically when we are just doing the exploration of the market need for a solution. So a lot of the ones you saw in health sciences, finance, even the climate are kind of in phase two or approaching phase two, where we're actually putting these solutions out in the real world. This one is very near and dear to my heart and was kind of the first use case that Jennifer mentioned this at the top of the program, that I started developing almost over 3 years ago now, which had to do with this idea of personal data assets. And we've talked about this a little bit, which is how do you incentivize positive behavior in the real world through the idea of creating or being able to capture the outcomes of such behavior, capturing those as assets and then being able to utilize those assets to gain some sort of reward. And coming from a background in gaming, my thinking went to essentially creating a narrative platform where people would be able to engage with things in the real world, but from a narrative perspective, but be rewarded with assets that were not just virtual assets like in a video game, but that had actual real world value. And that's when I met Jennifer, and we ended up, building a lot more. But this is still very important to us, this idea both of being able to develop a portfolio of data assets for a person, for a community. It's also very, very applicable to the agricultural example that we saw. What we are actually developing is a portfolio of assets for these farms and farmers. There's no reason why we can't do the same thing for every individual, where just like, we talked about credit card miles and other alternate sources of value, there's no reason why our data can literally not become a portfolio of assets for us. And these data economic nodes that we were talking about become essentially the gatekeepers between us and the rest of the world that is essentially managing. This becomes the representative almost of creating, managing, and helping us gain value of our data assets. So we've been talking a lot about enterprise use cases so far. We've been working on this idea of a personal data asset platform that's backed by a telecom network. And we've had some very interesting conversations with some telecom companies already about how something like this could be brought to life. Obviously, very, very big picture thing. But then also looking at specific use cases for what such a platform can enable. So we've been thinking about creating this platform that, as I said, is essentially a narrative or an entertainment platform. It's a storytelling platform, but that is geared to drive empathetic, positive behavior through narrative. And there are three aspects that we are looking at. We are looking at how to drive positive civic behavior in the real world. We are looking to see how we can drive self-education and distributed education and self-learning, both as far as academics is concerned, but also in terms of arts and science and arts, especially music and so on. And then a pure gaming and a pure interactive entertainment platform. And honestly, if anyone's interested, that's kind of something that I can go on for hours about. I would love to have conversations about. So so that's where we're at. And I want to just quickly introduce Peter, whom we've started working with recently on some of these ideas. Peter is a very, very established and well-respected creative, and has been helping us kind of solidify this idea of driving empathy through narrative. So maybe Peter, you can introduce yourself and give us a couple of your early thoughts on that concept.
Sure. Well, Ark and I go back to our Microsoft days where we actually worked in gaming together. So we kind of cemented some of this this passion for gaming. And personally, I've always been a storyteller. I'm a published novelist. I'm a composer. Most of my work involves the marriage of music and of storytelling in order to create some sort of emotional reaction. I sit on panels all the time around the country on storytelling and fiction. And it's really kind of true that most modern storytelling is centered on some sort of emotional reaction to the character or the situation. New York publishers and even online platforms and games increasingly, and by the way, this extends even into the corporate world, as Ark and I know, when you get into scrums with PR teams, it's really all about personalizing the story in some way that creates emotional attachment. So I've got a couple of IP that I've developed that really dovetail very, very well with what Ark and his team are building around advancing story with an emotional premise that would solicit behaviors or actions from the participants on the basis of rewarding good behavior. And it's actually a really exciting idea, because as much as it's important for us to have all kinds of stories, the stories that contribute to the public good are the stories that last, are the stories that most modern storytellers agree are the important ones to be told. And this will be a platform, I think, that accomplishes both things. So I'm excited to be part of it.
Thanks so much, Peter, and couldn't be more excited to be working with you again on something that's, honestly, like I've been thinking about for almost 20 years now. I think we are kind of at the end of our segment with our partners, and there's a lot more, obviously, that we could be talking about. But I'll just wrap us up with a few thoughts just around what we've heard here. We've been talking a little bit about the big picture implication of data economics and data economic networks. But what happens once these data economic networks start propagating? We are seeing them within specific industries, within specific industry verticals. And this idea of an alternate source of value, an alternate source of wealth for individuals and organizations, this portfolio of data assets, is just one of many large implications of data economic solutions and these data economic networks getting implemented and expanding. We've already looked at the classes of problems, very hard problems and opportunities that can start getting addressed by data economics. We've already talked about the idea of what happens to the value of the underlying data when it's assetized, and the fact that it becomes proportional to the number of new data assets that you can actually derive from that. What happens, and this is such an interesting idea from an economics perspective that Jennifer and I have talked about a lot, which is, what happens to the traditional economic loop, where usually the source of value or the markers of tokens of value in an economic system is introduced by a third party, and there is a scarce amount of it, whether it's money or whatever else. But in this case, we are giving the tools to the people who are doing the work, for the people who are actually producing the outcomes, to generate these markers of value, these markers of utility that they can then utilize to gain new value. This completely changes the fundamental economic loop in a data economy versus a traditional economy, which again, we can explore for probably years. And what's happening is that we're creating, as these data economic networks form, a layer between the traditional currency and financial systems and goods and services, where there was only one kind of connection that we could make in terms of expressing value, which was goods and services or things and money. But now you have obviously things and money, but you have data asset and money, you have data asset and goods and services, and you have data asset and data asset. So we have these massive opportunities to broaden the vocabulary to express and transact value through data economic networks. And if you take this one step further, then you see that as these data economic networks start developing within industries, they're going to start connecting. Just like we've seen the finance platform, the data economic derivatives platform, and our healthcare platform, as well as our industrial traceability platform, starting to connect and create these network of networks, so to speak. And what happens then? That is specifically the way that, for example, the internet was built, is that it's a network of networks. And so we envision this idea of a data economic internet that's going to get layered over the existing internet as a representation of a completely alternate and additional source of value than our economic language has been able to capture. And that's what we've been doing for the past 3 years. As I said, we've been working as a research alliance across a few organizations and individuals over the past 3 years to develop the science of data economics and the Lydion technology that we've talked about. This year, our focus has been on bringing these organizations, individuals, research, and IP together under a single umbrella that we call the Data Economics Company. And honestly, today is the first time that we are discussing Lydion or the data economics company outside our ecosystem. And honestly, we couldn't have gotten here without the contributions of our team, some of whom you've met, some of whom hopefully you will meet, and all of the partners and advisors who you just met, as well as many that, again, we hope you will meet in the future. And shout out to Mark O'Neill, if you're there. I know we couldn't get you on here, but again, couldn't be here without you. So Jen, I guess it's back to you, maybe, to wrap us up.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think thank you for all of those who have been able to hang on. Again, we'll be putting this content out as recording, so those who have to drop, we're just going to wrap it up here and then go into the Q&A after a quick wrap up. So, you know, to just let people know where all of this is going back to our original, you know, our origins, I guess, as a group, this did really start as a group sharing research questions, sharing ideas, and we see that type of intellectual exchange is really critical to continuing what we're all doing to advance the field of data economics. So, you know, Arga, I'll let you talk a bit about, you know, what we have to come.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the key values that we have is to, you know, empower people to participate in data economics, learn about the science, and contribute to advancing the field intellectually, academically, and with practical implementations. You know, and I believe that we wanted to have a little chat with Michelle, and you wanted to introduce the Alliance.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a pretty significant task ahead to help communicate and educate around all of this. So Michelle, if you could introduce yourself and talk a bit about that, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Michelle Savangsuk, and I oversee all of the creative. From my background, I was formerly at Disney, and I oversaw the design development team for Disney.com. After that, I've been working as a creative consultant and freelance designer, and also been working closely with ARCA for the last few years on various projects. So yeah, we are announcing the formal expansion of our research collective into the Data Economics Research Alliance. The objective and vision of the Alliance is to discuss research priorities and publications, but we will also be forming targeted groups around specific topics and industry challenges. Whoops, Arthur, you muted, I think.
Yeah, we'll have a lot more information about the Alliance, and we have Lydion Insider, which is launching very soon. Everyone participating in this session as a panelist or audience is going to have information very soon on how to access and get into Lydion Insider. We'll have a ton of very cool stuff on there. So if you enjoyed this session, you're going to have a really good time up there, I think. And joining the Alliance is really as easy as signing up to be part of the research collaborations. Absolutely no cost, no obligations other than participation in the intellectual exchange. That's how we've built everything that you've seen so far, and that's how we plan to keep advancing the science.
Yep. We are also going to be heavily utilizing our publishing platform to bring a bunch of content to all of our audiences, starting out with the Lydion Insider publication, and which is launching before the end of the year, which is soon, and followed shortly by the Lydion, which will be our destination site for data economics research and academic content, as well as showcases on how organizations are using the science of data economics. And we also continue to record podcasts and videos through our series, Brave New Data.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. And, you know, I can't emphasize enough the importance of including communications education via the publishing platform for data economic solutions overall, and for the overall development of a discipline like data economics that needs to make abstract, technical, mathematical concepts accessible to people from all industries and backgrounds. So thank you, Michelle, for helping us lead the charge. And everything that you've seen, you know, thank you, Alice, for your shout out, but a big part of it is Michelle helping us condense these really abstract and difficult and sometimes very technical concepts into things that people can like look at and be happy.
Yeah. The abstract is the key word, I think, in a lot of this. I throw that around a lot. And it makes for a very interesting design challenge, which I actually really do enjoy very much. And yeah, to kind of help make these concepts accessible, which is really important for us, we're going to be hosting a number of virtual sessions throughout next year and later part of 2021. So such as live conferences and forums to help further develop all aspects of data economics through this collaborative alliance-based approach. And you know, throughout this time, the content on Lydion will continue to grow, which is fantastic. And we are really excited and really looking forward to all the contributions that will be developed through the Alliance.
Thanks, Michelle. I think I'll wrap us up here, and thank you everyone for hanging out with us. This was so much fun, and thank you, Jennifer, for guiding us through all this today and just in general. Really appreciate your help, and for every single member of our team. You know, this is just a start. This was literally the first time, as I said, that we've talked about any of this stuff outside of our alliance and our collaborators. So a lot more is coming through Q1 through Q3, Q4 of next year. We are going to be actually rolling out a lot of these solutions. We're going to be talking a lot more publicly. We're going to have a series of these sessions like this one, with sessions that are more interactive and panels. So a lot is coming over the next 3 to 4 months, and we'd love for if you're on this call, or if you are watching this later, we absolutely want you involved. So we're going to reach out to you about Lydion Insider. Please sign up. We're going to make it super easy. We're going to have a ton of events that's going to be broadcast on Insider. We're going to send you emails when we have this, and talk to us. We are very interested. Everything that we've done so far, all of the folks you've seen so far, everything just came from like having a conversation, not really pitches or anything like that. So talk to us, read our stuff. If you want to work with us on building stuff, we are always open, and join the Alliance. It's super easy and really great way to stay in touch.
Yeah. Hey, so, Arka, I'm not going to let this whole group off the hook yet, because we do have some audience questions, and I want to make sure we get to those. I think some people are hanging out to hear what we have to say. So
fantastic.
If it's okay, we're just
let's do it. Yeah, I'm really glad. Yeah.
Signing off. So those who are still on, if you have questions, we'll just open up the floor now to all of those and start having the discussion. So Arka, this first question, in a world where people get paid for their data assets, is it likely to make it prohibitively difficult to create products requiring mass market data? So does this create a bias towards buying data only when smaller numbers of people are involved, or will this adjust by having different pricing for your data depending on how it's used? There are a few questions in there, so let me know if you need help unpacking that.
Yeah, could you just go through the questions once again, just so I know, because some of these might be other folks.
Yeah, is it difficult to create products requiring mass market data?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and I think the answer is it all depends on what kind of data it is. There is a lot of data sources out there, and it's kind of interesting that question came up, because the first prototype that we ever built was for the platform that you guys saw for the health sciences, for the value-based agreements platform, and we actually built that using publicly available data, which was essentially Medicare, anonymized claims data that was out there. So that just by itself is a great example of mass market, like data sets that are available publicly that could be used to create interesting data assets. It's all about what do you use it for. So it's just like a raw material, just because sand is freely available at a beach doesn't make it not useful. There's a ton of things we build out of sand. It's just a question of finding the right use for the data itself, but more importantly, how do you take different data assets, combine them, and create these derivative data assets? So I think it's all contextual. I don't know if anyone, maybe Sataj or
add, I'd like to add on to that. In terms of like, hey, the cost of data and how that could potentially change. I think it's going to be impacted just in terms of like the challenge in collecting that data. If it's something that if there's opportunities to give people control of their data, and then that data then becomes more rare, more sparse, fewer people are sharing it, then likelihood the cost of that data for people to get it is going to go up. If it's something that people are comfortable with sharing already, and they have control with it, or it's readily available, easily available, out in the open, out in the public, then the cost of that data is not going to be significant. But that's and that's just a reflection of the economics there. I think that's how we want it to work. That's how it how it works in so many other areas.
Thanks. Thank you guys for answering that question. I'll go on to the next one. The next question is, it seems like some of the largest companies exploiting data for their own uses are perfectly content to keep collecting and using data using the status quo. I'm sure that's the case, basically without caring about how the data owners or maybe generators feel about this. What do you think needs to happen to make changes in data equity on this larger scale?
That's one of my favorite questions of all time. And that's something that I am very, very passionate about on a personal level and professional level. And we have our hypotheses around this. If you think about all the apps on your phone that you use, let's say the Maps app that you have, or the the social media apps that you have, we tend to think of these as free because we've been trained to think of these as free. They're not free. We are paying for all these apps with our data, and we're pretty much giving a carte blanche to the people that we're giving it to use it for any purposes that they want. Whether it's for social good or to dismantle democracy. So that is first and foremost something that people need to be aware of, that they are actually paying with their data already. And we believe that once that becomes a relatively well understood notion, the next demand that people are going to have is that, okay, that if that value is already being derived by you, I want a part of that value. As soon as people realize that they're missing out and that there's a way for them to not miss out, the equation changes. And this becomes even more interesting when we look at enterprise, because enterprise is generating the largest amounts of data. I mean, consumer is great, but it's nothing compared to enterprise. We need to make sure that industry understands the amount of value that is just sitting in these data sets that they think of as exhaust of their businesses, and get them to that same point, which I think we are doing more and more, is that they're missing out on value by just giving their data away or by just keeping it locked in a silo somewhere. Once that happens, I think people will start. This is not going to happen overnight, but it's also, I don't think, going to take like 15, 20 years. I think it's going to sit somewhere in the middle there, where this is going to become pretty obvious, because the fact is that, as the question states, there's a tremendous amount of value already being derived from our data, from enterprise data, and there's a tremendous amount of more value that can be derived, as we've been discussing. So it's just a question of when we A, have the tools, which is what we are working on, and B, we have the education and the infrastructure to be able to make this a reality.
Thank you. No, I think that was a great explanation, and it kind of lends itself to go into one of these other questions that's asked. So I'm going to skip around in the question list, but is it more or less or equally difficult to value data assets than any other asset? I'm thinking about mortgages, which are highly standardized to make it easier to value, buy, and sell. Do we need to develop data value standards for data economics to take off? And I love this question, I'll say, because I've been in some conversations with some of the folks on the line today, such as Pat and Alan, where we've talked about the need for this kind of standardization across in different industries, like the way that we talk about an outcome, the way that we talk about business rules that might lend themselves, for example, to these outcomes-based contracts in healthcare. I mean, more broadly, from this group, what are some of the areas that might need to be standardized, and how do you see that happening? And I guess further to that, is it a prerequisite that everything has to be standardized before data economics can work, or can we do some of this without the lift of standardization first?
Jennifer, why don't you take a stab at answering that question? Because it's one of your favorite questions.
I can tell you my opinion on that is yeah, I think that this will be some of the specific solutions or approaches will be vastly facilitated by developing, I guess you could say, like the business consensus around some of these pieces first. But I think the beauty of some of the things we're talking about in these data economics systems, or building on a data economic operating system more broadly, is that everything doesn't have to be interoperable right off the bat. You can build in these pockets, as we've seen, and then find ways to connect them later and use, as I understand it, like the machines within the system, right? The evaluators, kind of tools within the system to translate across those different domains. So even if you kind of have two different standards or two different, opinions of what something means when you start, at some point you can build a way to translate between those. So I hope I got that right from a technical standpoint, but I mean, that's just kind of my gut feeling on it.
Absolutely, and even from a whether it's a technical or economic standpoint, that is exactly the idea of a frame of reference, which is, at the end of the day, it's like the standards only matter as far as the participants who care about those standards. So at the end of the day, if we have a certain data economic frame of reference with a certain set of data circulating and a different one with a certain different sets of data circulating, the question then becomes, in order for that, the utility of the data that's being expressed through the asset to be realized, do we need it to be globally accepted? Like, we have these, stock market or, financial markets. Do we need it to be globally accepted in order for that utility to be to be expressed? Like Bitcoin, for example, is a great example there, where you need to have these cryptocurrency exchanges that are setting the price. Otherwise, there is no real way for people to use it as currency. But it's
we
very
still have
different.
a way to exchange between like a Bitcoin and a dollar and
Exactly. That's exactly what an exchange is. So when it comes to a data economic exchange, so to speak, it only matters as to who really is evaluating and, to your point, and then utilizing the data. So in a healthcare example, it might only matter to, let's say, the pharma company, the insurance companies, regulators, providers, etc., that they understand the standards among themselves. But obviously, to Pat and Alan's point from earlier, we want to start making these standards more and more available so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel every time they want to set up a little economy among themselves.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that. I would say from the business and industry standpoint, sometimes it's hard to get all of these, like, how are you going to get 20 pharma companies necessarily on the same page? So if there are different, frames that they can each use within their own ecosystem or with their own partners, and then, figure out that interoperability later, I think that's a huge plus. So thank you so much for explaining that more in depth. So one more question. And this question is, definitely Surtaj, Arga, this one's for you guys on the technical front. In your observation, what's the size of the DEN, the data economic network, that would be needed to create meaningful products using data assets?
Oh, great. Refer to prior answer there. It's exactly the same answer, which is, in order to create a meaningful data economy that, let's say, helps us adjudicate a value-based agreement, the size of the data economic network only needs to be, and I don't know, 2 to begin with, which is the pharma company and the insurance company. And I can think of several examples where just 2 participants are sufficient for a data economy to exist. Now, how interesting those data economies are completely depend on the type of data being traded. Like if it's healthcare data, then yes, there's probably a higher likelihood that a small data economy will have some value to it. So it is absolutely a function of what it is that the participants are trying to do. And then again, as I said in my previous answer, if, like, let's say, going back to the gaming scenario, let's say that we wanted to create a class of asset that people are generating by playing a game or by doing things in the real world that's part of a narrative framework. In that case, let's say that we wanted to attract, let's say, people who watch esports to come and participate in something like that, and maybe, like, quote unquote, invest their money in these virtual ecosystem. And in that case, we would need something very similar to like a stock market or something like that, where a random person can come in and understand the value of the data circulating within the network. So it completely boils down to the specific solution that is being implemented, and whether or not the participants natively understand the value of each other's data, or whether that needs to be expressed.
That's really cool. So thank you for explaining that more in depth. That wraps up the questions we've had come in so far from the audience. I think we've run a bit over, but I think we were all happy to those who could hang on and have the chance to delve into this a bit more deeply. So I really thank you all today for your time, for your participation. Again, feel free to reach out to me or to reach out to any of the folks on this panel. You can reach us at Insider, so insider@lydion.com if you want to send an email Really, thank you all again for your participation. Thank you so much to the panelists. Arka and Sertaj, thank you for putting together so much content for today. And Michelle, beautiful work on the slides and the visuals really helped explain what these guys were talking about. So I just really want to express my appreciation and thanks to all of you. Hope you have a great day and that you're all staying safe and healthy.
Thank you, Jennifer, again, for leading us through this. Thank you, everyone. We had a great time.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
That will sign off.
All right.